ZK products, where we break them down with rich flavors and sweet insights. I'm Queenie, and I'll be co hosting this episode with Omer. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Sachin Kumar, co founder of ZKP2P, a fast, trust minimized, and composable peer to peer on-off-ramp protocol. Sachin, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Queenie. Happy to be here.
ZKP2P is one of the most frequently mentioned names when it comes to ZK products. So, could you please introduce yourself and share how you started this journey?
Sure. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sachin. I'm building ZKP2P along with my co-founder Richard. Previously, I was a smart contract engineer at Set Protocol, where we built on-chain indices. That's where I met Richard along with Alex and Brian, who also contributed to building ZKP2P. We were all ex-colleagues at Set. I think we built the first instance of ZKP2P at ZK Hack Lisbon in April 2023, so around 2 years ago now. Um, at that time, I was like a Binance P2P user because the centralized on-off ramping services that were available to me were charging a very hefty fees, close to 5 to 6%. But then the UX of Binance P2P was very cumbersome. I had to send the money and then wait and pray to God that the seller would release me the money, and it would take anywhere around 15 minutes to an hour. So that was the problem that was constantly lingering in my mind, is whether there is a better solution for that problem. And almost at that time, I was also learning ZK. And when I met my colleagues at ZK Hack Lisbon, and we were brainstorming about ideas that we can build upon, I pitched building a ZK powered peer to peer on off ramping protocol to them. And I remember Brian mentioning that apparently Venmo sends emails which contain details about the transaction. And I was obviously aware of about ZK email then. And that's when like we put two and two together and we tried building a peer-to-peer on-off ramping protocol powered by ZK email. Uh, Fortunately, we were able to complete the whole end-to-end working demo POC within the time duration of the hackathon, and we presented it. We won the second prize, and that garnered a lot of attention. And thanks to the ZKML team, we were able to secure a PSC grant, which helped us like shipping ZK P2P to production.
Wait, who won the first prize?
I remember it being a team of 6 researchers who built a new ZK protocol, which I do not recollect the name of. Yeah. I think we were the only app that uh, was shipped during the hackathon.
Oh, nice. And by the way, SAT protocol is also an interesting product.
Yeah, it is like one of the OG DeFi protocols.
Yes, exactly. So, could you walk us through the design of the product first?
Yeah, like the construction is very simple. In any peer-to-peer on-off ramping protocol, you have a buyer and a seller, and because the buyer and seller do not trust each other, they have to involve like a centralized third-party intermediary to help them facilitate the transaction. And the centralized intermediary primarily serves two purposes. One is it escrows the assets it escrows the crypto assets on behalf of the seller, and it does dispute resolution. So basically, it makes sure that the buyer has already paid the seller, and only then it unlocks the escrow to the escrowed on-chain assets to the buyer. So our core innovation is basically like removing that centralized intermediary and instead using two things. One is the smart contract to escrow the on-chain assets, and second is using ZK to do dispute resolution, essentially proving that the buyer indeed paid the seller by generating a proof of payment and submitting that to the escrow contract on-chain, and then unlocking the escrowed assets.
So, does the off-ramp process work differently from the on-ramp process?
Um, yes, there's like a slight difference in both the processes. So as an on-ramper, when I come to the protocol, I signal an intent that I want to on-ramp, let's say 10 I want to buy, let's say, 10 US dollars, USDC. Then we lock the USDC on behalf of the buyer. The buyer pays to the seller, generates a proof, and then immediately gets the USDC. So it's like a very synchronous process. It's like step one, two, three, four. Whereas in the case of an off-ramper, or rather we call them liquidity providers, because they are more of a sophisticated actor in the protocol. They have to come and lock their USDC on chain and then wait for order flow, as in wait for someone to on ramp against them, and only then they effectively off ramp. So the the off ramping flow is a bit asynchronous. You have to wait for order flow.
I see. So it sounds like the liquidity provider, they're the more passive party here in the process.
Yeah, like right now, liquidity providers are more like passive market makers. But we are definitely like thinking about how to um, enable like instant on off ramping as well. So yeah.
I see. Because you just launched this V2 version, so what's the difference between V2 and V1?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like our V0 proof of concept during the hackathon was built using ZK email, and we continued building that, and we shipped our V1 in November 2023. Like the major differences between V1 and V2 are A, like in V1, because they were the very early version of our smart contracts, we had the escrow contract as well as the verification logic clubbed together in a single contract. That meant whenever we had to like integrate a new payment provider, we had to rewrite the whole escrow plus the verification logic. So that is one thing, that is one learning that we took from V1, and instead what we did in V2 was we unbundle the escrow and the verification logic. So now the escrow is a generic escrow protocol where you can specify any unlocking mechanism, and then that would unlock the escrow. And then that means like we can write individual verifiers for each payment provider that we integrate, along with their different verification mechanisms. So we can have like a ZK email Venmo verifier. We can have a reclaim Venmo verifier. We can have a reclaim Wise verifier, a TLS notary Wise verifier. So like all these different verifiers plug into the escrow contract, and then they uh, like do the verification bit. So that effectively means that we can like ship a new payment platform integration in like 3 days rather than a month, which was the case last time. So that is one major improvement in between in V2 compared to V1. The second thing that we did was we moved away from ZK email, we are instead using ZKTLS to generate the proof of payment in the design that I talked about. The reason that we moved away from ZK email was ZK email is like a good, I mean, library, but it is not very suitable for our use case, because we are generating payment proofs, and generally, like the receipts that we get, the email receipts that we get, they do not contain like rich payment data. Most of the time, there would not be any unique identifier for the sender or the receiver in the email because there is no need to put it there. In contrast, like for example, API responses are very rich. You will have unique IDs for the sender, unique IDs for the receiver, and a lot of other data. And the second thing is like compared to between emails and API is that emails are like the template changes very frequently. And that means like if the template changes, then we will have to stop the protocol, rewrite the circuits, do the trusted setup ceremony again, which will again be like a 1 week duration for which the protocol would not be live. So in contrast, like we do not have to do like a new trusted setup ceremony again, because the circuit that we use in ZKTLS is essentially the same across every payment provider, every proof. So that was another like major shift that we did in V2. Like we moved away from ZKML to ZKTLS, although like we already support ZKML as well. As in, if it makes sense to use ZKML over ZKTLS in a particular payment provider, we can do that because, as I talked about, like there's a different verifier logic, and it's very easy to plug that into the escrow contract. And the third thing that we did was like some privacy improvements. For example, like earlier we used to post off-ramper details directly on chain, but in this V2 we moved that to like a off-ramp, a relayer service where it just holds the off-ramper raw details and then makes it available to the on-ramper when they are trying to on-ramp.
I see. So you just mentioned several ZKTLS solutions. I'm curious, how do they work together? And what criteria do you use when selecting the solutions?
Yeah, as I mentioned, like we have decoupled the verification logic from the escrow logic, and like each of these individual ZKTLS solutions have a different trade-off. For example, the reclaim one today is the most production ready, and it is the most usable. It has an app clip flow. That's why we went forward with it in the like the early version of V2. But then we are also like looking at other potential solutions, like the one that is offered by Primus Labs is a factor more performant. So like it decreases the proving time from 10 to 15 seconds to 1 to 2 seconds. So that is a huge improvement for us and our users in terms of UX. So like we went with Reclaim early on because it was production ready, but we are looking at other ZKTLS solutions as well. And we are definitely interested in integrating them. There are also like there's a new one that is launched by Pluto, which apparently uses TEs. So I'm looking into that as well. I'm also keeping an eye on the TLS Notary V8 Alpha launch, which will be switching to Quicksilver and Vol based MPC TLS over Garble circuits based MPC TLS, which promises like from they would reduce the bandwidth from 30 MBs or rather 100 MBs to 30 MBs, which is a huge improvement compared to when we integrated them last time. So yeah, like we can support any and every ZKTL solution, and that is by design. And we are constantly looking for improvements in the UX, and whichever makes the most sense, we are ready to use that particular ZKTL solution.
Got it. So, because the ZKTLS space is also evolving very fast, so finally you will choose like whatever suits the product best. Maybe can provide better user experience.
Yeah, like last year when we started building with ZKTLS, the integration experience was not so great. Um, we had to dive deeper into like the core workings of ZKTLS. I had to dive deeper into TLS Notary to understand the roadmap and make sure that it intersects with our product roadmap and make sure that we would be able to ship something that is usable by the user. Um, but like compared to last year, like the new ZKTLS solutions are definitely way more mature. They most of them, if not all, have a dev portal, which is basically like a no-code interface where you can generate a proving config and generate a proof as well and get started like really fast. All of them have SDKs, and all of them make some trade-off in like performance or how they generate the proof. ZK, MPC, TLS, TEs, which launched recently. So yeah, like we at ZKP2P think that these solutions are going to be commoditized in the long term, and we just want to pick and choose the best ones for our use case.
Got it. And I think it's a very straightforward use case of ZKTLS. I think it's one of the favorites of Maddie, the founder of Reclaim, when he mentioned use cases last time with us. Yeah. So I've seen that there has been a remarkable growth in the transaction volume since the launch of V2. What are your go-to-market goals for this year?
Yeah, like we are looking to expand the product in basically both horizontal and vertical, as in we want to support more geographical locations and like maybe expand to LATAM, maybe expand to Southeast Asia and support those payment providers as well. And then we also want to do vertical integration and offer wallets and other teams who want to have like an embedded on-ramp provider in within their app. That way the user flow for their users become like extremely easy, and it's not very convoluted as compared to what it is today, where you have to jump to another app, do KYC, and then get the best quote, do the on-ramping. It will be very easy. As in, like if you're on-ramping within $100 roughly to test the app and test the waters, you should be able to do that within like 90 seconds or 1 minute. And we are planning to enable that.
So, given its peer to peer model, the platform actually has limited control over the entire transaction process. Are there any potential risks, like potential attacks?
Yeah, sure. There are a couple of risks in the protocol right now, and we have laid them down in our docs as well. We have tried to be very upfront about the risks that the product has. And since V0, V1, we have been actively sharing and improving upon those risks. The first major risk today is that for off-rampers, when they provision liquidity to the protocol, they expect the escrow to be unlocked by generating a proof, right? But then today, because ZKTLS is in its nascent stage, there's only solutions for one particular attester to generate the ZKTLS proof. That means, as far as the off-ramper is concerned, their liquidity is maybe at risk. If we go rogue and we generate like a fake proof, then their liquidity can be stolen by us. But then that's why we do not actively promote liquidity provision. We are the major liquidity provider today. And once we do figure out how to decentralize that tester, make it less trusted on us and like make it less trusted on us and distribute the trust across multiple parties, which is still like an open problem, then I think we can incentivize more liquidity provision to the protocol. The other thing is like very similar to DeFi, you have smart contract risk. So our protocol is audited by PSC. Uh, V1 was audited by PSC. V2, we are getting an audit using an optimism grant as well. So hopefully, once that is done, that risk should be dialed down. The another risk that liquidity providers face is that if they get a lot of order flow and they get a lot of payments in their Venmo, Wise, Revolut, or Cash App, then that might raise flags and Venmo might ask them to explain the transactions. We have seen that more often with Wise compared to every other payment platform. And maybe that's why like we allow the liquidity provider to specify like max order sizes, min order sizes, and even a cadence of transaction. Like all these logic is posted off chain in the relay, and they can specify I only want to transact with these people at this rate at these order sizes. That would allow them to essentially be not deductible like by these payment platforms because some of them do not like peer-to-peer transactions happening on their payment platform. I think yeah, most of the risks are for the liquidity provider only. As far as the on-ramper is concerned, the only risk that they face is them not being able to generate a proof and hence losing their funds. And we try to solve that by increasing the reliability of proof generation, making sure that we have covered all the cases we have tested extensively before we ship something in production. And second, allowing them to contact the seller if they are not able to generate the proof to manually release a payment to them.
So what are the type of users that you see on both ends, on-ramp and liquidity providers? What can you tell us about them?
Right now, we're seeing very small size on-ramp transactions, like in the $100 to $200 range across various currencies, although mostly concentrated in US dollars. And like for sellers, for liquidity providers, we are seeing small amounts as well, like $100 who are offering like one-to-one rates or even like 0.99 USD per USDC. So it seems that they want to off-ramp fast. Maybe they need the off-chain money. But then we're also seeing like large, sophisticated market makers who are providing more than $1,000, close to $5,000, who are charging close to 1.5% spread, which I think we shared like last week, which effectively uh, equates to 87% APR, which is much higher than any other DeFi protocol today. Although right now, we are the major liquidity providers on the protocol. Um, Especially in the first week, we were the only liquidity providers, but we are slowly seeing more people come on board, and we want to have more retail liquidity providers on the protocol because, like, peer-to-peer markets are effectively have cross-site network effects, as in we need to essentially maintain the demand, have an equal demand on both the buyers and the seller side.
Do you take inspiration from other successful peer-to-peer marketplaces?
Yes, as I mentioned, like Binance P2P is definitely an inspiration for the product. Very similar to how like we moved from centralized exchanges to decentralized exchanges. Centralized exchanges were needed in the early versions when we were still figuring out which formula works the best on chain. But now that we have figured out that DEXs work and DEXs can support volume, we we are seeing more increased volumes on DEXs. I think we would probably follow a similar path in for peer-to-peer on-off ramps as well. Once we prove that this works and like it works at scale, I am expecting more people to use our protocol, and it would be affect like as I mentioned, like we are looking to have very similar reputational mechanisms like Binance P2P. We're also looking at a couple of other LATAM-based peer-to-peer on-off ramp protocols who are very LATAM focused, and they did some innovations which was really interesting, and we want to integrate those as well.
So currently, if you need to imagine, maybe you already have plans for V3, what are kind of like the top features or changes to design that you want to make? Like you mentioned privacy before. Is it something you're going to pursue further in upcoming version, more of like long-term thing? Like how is the roadmap looks like?
And that's a very interesting question. There are a couple of bottlenecks or limitations that we have in the current V2 protocol right now. I think the major one is it is not, even though it has improved a lot since V1, but it is not very integration friendly. Primarily because in the happy path we ask the user to generate a proof, which means uh, not all users would be able to complete the flow because you have to install an extension. And if you're doing that on another app, you again would have to install an extension there as well, which would be very cumbersome for the user. So we understand that and we want to remove the proving bit from the happy path and only keep it for dispute resolution. But that's still like an open question. We are not completely sure how to do that. Maybe we can use TEs and optimistic release mechanisms. But we're still actively exploring that problem statement. The other thing that we definitely want to do is enable instant off-ramping, as I mentioned before. We want to have both active on-ramping and off-ramping, and then passive liquidity providers for uh, both sides of the market. Again, we have a couple of ideas. Maybe we could use TEs to encumber the accounts encumber the off-chain accounts and use that as the off-chain escrow because we do not have smart contracts in the Web 2 world. So maybe TEs are the best replacement for smart contracts in the Web 2 world. So that is also like a path that we are actively exploring and maybe could be a part of potential V3. The other thing that we want to do is like not every payment platform is integratable. Like for example, in mostly in Southeast Asia, most of these payment platforms are app-based compared to like web-based, and it's very hard to reverse engineer the API endpoints and prove them in ZKTLS. So we want to have like some sort of a community-based dispute resolution mechanism where like even if we do not support the most secure ZKTLS-based dispute resolution mechanism, you can still fall back to the community-based dispute resolution mechanism where you rely on the community to do the dispute resolution. And we expect the dispute resolution mechanism to be kicked off only in like 1% of the cases. And 99% of the cases, because there's a reputation mechanism involved, the buyers and sellers would act like happily just trade with each other and like resolve any issues that they encounter by themselves rather than raising it to the higher level. Also, we are looking for like maybe switching to MPC-TLS or these new Quicksilver Vol-based ZKTL solutions, which would, even if we have to do dispute resolution, the UX is a lot more smoother. Hopefully we can generate proof within 1 to 2 seconds. And uh, because we can generate proof so fast, we can have like a lot more attesters. So we can decentralize the network of attesters. Like right today, only have one attester, which is us. But then in the future, we are looking to decentralize the network of attesters so that you do not have to trust us and the protocol is actually decentralized and self-custodial.
Interesting. I think you just mentioned about like how to improve the product to achieve the product's goal of being fast and trust minimized. But you have another goal of being composable. I'm curious, like, yeah, how to achieve this goal.
Yeah, I think like as I mentioned before, in order to be composable, we have to do two things. One is remove there is a necessary and there's a sufficient requirement. The necessary requirement is that we have to remove the proving bit from the happy path, and we have to only then you would be able to do the on ramping on another app, for example. And then the second is that we obviously need to build SDKs and APIs so that we can serve these other wallets and apps who want to integrate us. Today we have like a redirect based flow where you redirect to ZKP2P with query params filled in. So the user already sees the the amount that he has to on ramp using which particular payment platform. You set it beforehand, and the user is able to on ramp within like 90 seconds and then go back to your app. But that is still like that it still has some friction, and hopefully we want to do very similar to how Privi did embedded wallets. We want to do embedded on ramps where you come and sign in with your Google, and then you immediately do a Venmo payment and get money on chain, and then you can deposit it into Aave or do DeFi. So yeah, like it's still like an open problem statement. We have a couple of ideas, and we are working towards it.
Cool.
So you are basically building apps that allow you to kind of like prove private Web 2 things in a sense, right? Like ZKTLS or T, whatever. Have you thought about using it in for other use cases other than the P2P payments?
We did try to experiment with a more generalized peer-to-peer marketplace for any off-chain digital good. And as part of that, we launched like our ticket marketplace, and we also launched our domain marketplace. But unfortunately, neither of them got any usage. So it turns out like most of the blockchain space is still mostly about money and DeFi. And that is, I guess, a lesson that we learned the hard way. Um, but then I do expect these other peer-to-peer payment platforms to emerge in the medium to long term. But then one thing that we realized is that, for example, for a peer-to-peer ticket marketplace to be on chain, it obviously is better compared to like existing secondary ticket marketplaces. For example, it has less fraud because it uses ZKTLS. The payment is integrated, so you do not have to um, use like a separate payment provider, so you can remove the fees that they charge, and it's a lot more smoother UX. But then the first thing that you need for a peer-to-peer ticket marketplace to exist on chain is that you need to have USDC to buy the ticket. So you need to solve peer-to-peer. You need to solve on-off ramping, or rather embedded on-off ramping, before you can have e on-chain e-commerce. So that is one learning that we had from building those marketplaces, and that's why we are doubling down on building. Uh, we're doubling down on solving on-off ramping first. But then, like within on-off ramping, we also want to do. We have to do KYC in the short, medium to long term. So we could use ZKTLS for KYC as well. And anything, we could also use ZKTLS, for example, vampire attacking existing Binance P2P merchants and bridging their reputation on chain. So anything that serves the product, we would be ZKTLS is the tool that we want to use as many times as possible to improve the UX of the product and make it more reliable and useful.
Have you thought about how to solve the bootstrapping problem, or are you already past this stage? In a marketplace, you need to have kind of like both sides, and also the marketplace itself. So again, I know that usually it's a big challenge in starting this project. So maybe you can share more on how you solved it or how you plan to solve it, how you view it in general.
Yeah, like effectively any marketplace, any two-sided marketplace, you need to incentivize both the demand side and the supply side. And I think at least in on-off ramping, there's a existing demand in both directions, but we are seeing like less liquidity provision compared to like on ramping, for example, because our flow today is more catered towards on ramping. But I believe like once we solve the instant off ramping bit, we would be able to match the order flows in both the directions. And once we figure that out, we can throw incentives on top of it to scale the product from there on. So we still haven't thrown incentives and uh, at the product yet because we still haven't figured out the right form factor for it. But once we do, I think, and if it is useful to the user, it would be hopefully easy to bootstrap using incentives.
Got it. Are there any interesting stories about like experiences that your users had so far using ZKP2P? Just, I don't know, some edge cases or stuff that you did not expect that happened.
I mean, because we are at the frontier of connecting Web 2 and Web 3 and using like these ZKTLS solutions, obviously there were like so many edge cases. Um, Fortunately, we were able to discover them in staging before we ship to prod. So we have like a very small testing group where everyone who's excited about us and ZKTLS in general is helping us to test the app before we ship it to prod. So we were able to mitigate that as much as possible. But then obviously we ran into a bunch of them on prod as well. Especially after the V2 launch, the first week, I and Richard were both swamped with support issues, and we were constantly on Telegram trying to help our users out. And I had to do all-nighters. And when I handed it off to Richard, he woke up, I went to bed, and then he continued, I guess, responding to messages in the support Telegram channel. The other story that we have is like, for example, in our V1 protocol, we had the Venmo integration using ZK email, but then turns out we were always expecting them to someday change the email template and our V1 protocol breaking, but they took a year and they finally changed the V1 their email template in November 2024, which is exactly like a year after we launched V1, and they removed all the personal identifiable data, which means like all the transaction data from the email. I'm not sure how much effect we had on them doing so, but because they removed all the details from the email, our protocol effectively broke, and then we were forced to move to ZKTLS and build like up the V2 protocol.
Maybe you should consider integrating an AI chat box, like an assistant for V3.
Yeah, that could be an interesting idea. Another thing that we are exploring is like using AI to reverse engineer these ZKTLS endpoints. I think Reclaim is also doing some work on that, where because every time we integrate like a payment platform, we have to figure out the path of API endpoints that we need to hit to finally get the transaction details. And we can do that for the payment platforms that we have access to. But for someone external who wants to help us integrate their local payment provider into ZKP2P, they do not have the necessary skills to like the reverse engineer the API. So we are looking into using AI to effectively reverse engineer the endpoints, and then they can hand it over to us, and we can generate the proofs on that and easily integrate that into ZK.
Did you have the chance to reach out to these payment platforms, Venmo and the like? I don't know, maybe you can reach out some agreement that there's going to be a button that you can ask to send a more detailed like email and then use ZK email or something?
We are in touch with like a couple of people from both Venmo and Revolut. Mostly they were excited about us. They learned about us because it seems they always also follow crypto. Um, but the ones that we are talking with, they do not control, I guess, what is sent in their emails. Also, it makes sense because it makes sense for them to not put data in their email because it's PII data, and they can be they can land in trouble because they are sharing PII data in email. That's why we moved away from email. And for example, in API responses or web pages, you have to show all the data to the user, and that's why we use that to generate the proofs over emails.
Yeah. So, since the platform is quite decentralized with no KYC or stuff like that, so I'm curious, are there any specific regulatory requirements that you need to comply with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Regulation is definitely a concern for us. Although right now, because we are small and we are not moving a lot of volume, and generally, like peer-to-peer trading is like a gray area in most jurisdictions that do not outright ban crypto. So it's not illegal per se, but it's not completely legal as well because the rules and the laws have not been defined. But I think the way we see ourselves is that we are a bulletin board similar to Binance P2P, but then we are permissionless, we are on-chain and decentralized in the medium to long term, like Uniswap. So the responsibility of fulfilling the compliance requirements falls on the sellers and the buyers who are using this tech rather than us. We definitely want to work with strong legal and compliance expertise to help clarify that further, though.
Hmm. Cool. So, it's good that currently it's not a burden for you to grow.
I think the playbook is very similar to Plaid in Web2, where they first started with just solving a pain point for their customers and businesses. And eventually they got regulated and added um, necessary stuff that made them compliant. And we, in our V2 protocol as well, as I mentioned, we have moved some logic to the backend service, especially the gating logic, as in the off-ramper can specify whom do I want to transact with. And in V3, that could be used to say, I only want to transact with KYC users. So some off-rampers could choose to do that, but then we will always, because the protocol is on-chain, the smart contracts are on-chain, the ZKTLS proving logic is open source. Some parties can always use the censorship-resistant Ethereum blockchain to transact with each other, irrespective of whether we support them in our interface or not.
Cool. Can the product actually pass the getaway test right now? Like, for example, if you're no longer operates the platform, someone can always build another front end to build another similar platform.
I think we are not all the way there yet, especially the ZKTLS bit is still that something that requires a lot of maintenance from our end. But once we have decentralized and made the ZKTLS bit self-served, like once we decentralize the ZKTLS bit and people are able to generate proofs without us being a dependency, then I think we will pass the getaway test.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Cool. As we're wrapping up, do you have any final thoughts or messages you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, we want to integrate as many payment platforms as possible. So if you're interested in helping us out integrate your local payment provider, we would be very happy to help you with it, and we can provide all the support and incentives that you need. We are effectively bottlenecked by us not having access to all the payment providers. So we need all the help that we can get from people who have access to those payment providers um, to help us integrate into the protocol. It's like the core, I guess, motive behind building V2 was making it very easy so that we can outsource it to people, and you should be able to help us integrate in like 3 days a new payment platform to ZKP2P. So do reach out if you're interested.
Cool. We have one last question for you that we ask every guest on our show. So please name a project that you are bullish about.
I think Aztec is the project that I'm most bullish about. Um, their private smart contracts are really interesting, and I see a way where we could potentially use them in future. Especially they could be used to uh, remove the dependency that we have on our off-chain privacy service, because we had to move some stuff off-chain because we could not store them on-chain. But for example, on Aztec, we could effectively store them on-chain, and we could also do private transactions apart from that.
Oh, I think that's sounds like a very perfect fit for what you are building for the end game. Yeah,
Yeah, privacy preserving chain goes very well with privacy preserving on-off-ramping protocol.
yeah, cool. Okay, I guess that's all for today. Sachin, thank you so much for joining us today, and it was great to learn about ZKP2P. For those who are interested to learn more, we've added some links in the show notes. Thank you, Omar, for co hosting with me.
Thank you, Sachin, Queenie.
Thank you.